My name is Nicholas Bell. I'm the curator in charge here at the Renwick Gallery. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight for a very special event. I know that of all the places in the world, Washington, D.C. is the last place in which Maya Lin needs any introduction. So I'm not going to truly introduce her. Instead, I'm going to thank her. 2 years ago, I called Maya on the phone. She did not know who I was. And I said, Maya, let me tell you a little bit about the Renwick Gallery, and let me tell you about the idea that I have for this building and what we could do with it. And I think within about 4 minutes, she was on board. And I think it was perhaps the moment I used the word wonder that she said, yes, wonder, that's what I've been looking for. That's what we work with. And she also said, by the way, advice comes free with Maya, which is great. She said, by the way, that show you're doing, you should call it just Wonder, nothing else. So, Maya, I want to thank you not only for naming the exhibition, but for being the foundation for our vision for the new Renwick Gallery. I think that it is incredibly fitting that you not only began your career within a square mile of this museum, but that at a point in your career when you were starting to reflect through your new book, Topologies, that you have come full circle back to Washington. So after Maya's talk, she's going to do a book signing. Her book that came out in October has already sold out. You cannot buy it online, so I strongly recommend that you buy it here. She'll be signing books here. You do have to go downstairs to the shop to purchase the book. She will also be signing copies of Wonder, the catalog for this exhibition, should you wish. And she has cards for her new project called What is Missing. Please join me in welcoming Maya Lin to the Renwick Gallery.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's really nice being here. I love being part of this show. Just look up for a second. It's just almost like a childlike love of experiencing things that makes this show so special for me to be a part of. I'm going to talk a little bit about my work. Can you hear if I do that? It's a little wispy. It took about 2 years to put this book together because I split my time between my art and my architecture, and then there are the memorials. And sequencing and setting up these different parts of my aesthetic took me a lot longer to figure out, and I'll go into that a little bit. But I'm going to start with what is kind of, there's 3 chapters based on art, and then there are 2 chapters on architecture and design, and then they're broken up by the 5 memory works, the memorials. So I'm going to start with the large out-of-door earthworks, which the chapter of that is called Out of the Earth, and this is an image of one of 3 wave fields. As an artist, I work in series, trying to explore differences in scale in one idea. So this started with one image. It's a naturally occurring water wave called a Stokes wave, which is completely symmetrical. I saw this image, and I knew I wanted to make an artwork out of it. And so I work in plasticine. It's like a liquid oil-based clay. And so for the University of Michigan, in front of a new aerospace engineering building, in I think 1993, I was researching aerodynamics, fluid dynamics. I came across that one image, and I knew that that's what I wanted to make out of the work. So I started studying wave formations. And at a certain point in time, you can analyze a water wave, but it's really hard to understand how one wave ends and another one begins. And at a certain point, you literally just had to get out there with your bulldozer operators and build the work. It's a little different than architecture because a maquette can almost only get you so far. And I actually think to make a work of art at this scale, it has to keep changing as you're building it. Anyway, so the first piece, and again, I work in series, is 100 feet by 100 feet. The scale is such that you can sit in a wave and read a book. The second in the series is called Flutter. It's at a federal courthouse in Miami, and it's not so much inspired by a wave formation, but what happens to the sand by wave action as it's about to hit the shore. So extremely shallow wave formations, almost 2 feet at the most. It's called flutter. And again, doing work out in the public realm, you get requirements, and one for the federal courthouse was not to make the waves very high anyway, because they were literally afraid of snipers. So there are just certain things that you have to deal with that you might not be thinking of when you're working in the public realm. The third and final of the wave field series is at Storm King, which is about an hour north of the city. You'll notice in the upper right hand, the red lines. Storm King Art Center was built as they were building the highway, Route 87. And this was the abandoned gravel pit that they were using, and they didn't know quite what to do with it, so they hid it behind a big earthen berm. So I was able to use all that soil and create an artwork. It's 11 acres, and for the final wave field, the idea was, well, what if I could make a field of waves that went over your head, that allowed you to disappear within a wave? So it took about a year and a half to build. The scale is each wave trough in this photograph you can see there's a high part so you can look down on the whole field, or from the lower part you explore it and you get literally lost in a wave, and the waves are about 18 feet high at their highest. And people have said, well, how do you make works like this, and how do they stand over time? And I'm from Athens, Ohio, so I'm from southeastern Ohio. And throughout the southeast, there are these ancient burial mounds of the Hopewell and Adena tribes. And farmers have lived with these mysterious, funny hills. One is in the shape of a serpent. There's an entire city called Mound City, and they've been there for over 1,500 years. So it's just something that, even though they change, and I keep going back up, and we worked with the state EPA, because it was a brownfield site, to turn it into this artwork. And within row 7 and row 6, there were streams of water. And so the microcosm and the ecology within those rows is changing over time. So if you go through the 6th or 7th wave, there are probably butterflies living because it's a little moister. So these pieces have a bit of a life of their own. Or this is a piece I did for a client in a private collection in New Zealand, and it literally started as a fold of paper. It's called A Fold in the Field, and I tend to model things larger and larger. The largest models were about 16 feet, and then you just have to go out there and build it. And it took a former flooded, degraded pasture land and kind of pulled the plain up, and it's called A Fold in the Field. And the folds go 60 feet high. Or this piece I did for a private art estate in southern Sweden. It's called 11-Minute Line. And it literally started, I was sitting in the driveway, it was gravel, and I made this little drawing. And then I timed my walk, and it turned into the 11-minute line. And the joke is, how much personality does one line drawing have? And when the early European settlers first came to the New World and they came across some of these burial mounds, they were so convinced that the tribes in present-day North America were too primitive, so that certainly a more sophisticated people came from Europe, built these pieces, and then went running back to Europe. So I couldn't resist in southern Sweden taking a little bit of southeastern Ohio to Europe, because one of my favorite mounds that I kind of grew up being aware of was called the Serpent Mound. And I don't know if any of you know it. It's literally a snake, and the snake's about to eat an egg. So I wanted to transfer a little bit of my hometown, southeastern Ohio roots to Europe. And that's the piece. Or the second in that series is a piece for a collection in Kentucky, and the collectors had built a house. It was really an Eames-inspired house, so I wanted to explore how much the character of a line drawing can almost be like a 50s boomerang shape. And so it's called the Kentucky Line. It's about, how big is it? It's about 1,000 feet long, and it goes up and down, and it's just in a private secluded area of their grounds. And I'm working on the last of that series, which will be a drawing that can't make up its mind whether it's drawing or language. And it won't look like that, but I've made about 1,000 drawings so far, and we're working on where that one will go right now. As I've been doing these large outdoor works, I've also done artworks that are as much framed by existing architecture. But the goal is not to be so much taken over by the architecture, but you're trying to create an environment working within a framework, working within like a man-made framework. So this was a piece called Groundswell for the Wexner Center for the Arts. And when Peter Eisenman built this building out, he collapsed, or he combined two grids, and there were these unplanned residual spaces that were highly prominent. So this, as you entered the building, was a 2-story high, empty concrete moat, filling up with trash, actually. So instead, I took 43 tons of recycled car glass. I gave myself a week. The dump trucks showed up, and I had 1 week in full view to make the piece. And the only thing I did to plan it was this one drawing. Because again, as an artist, can I take the spontaneity when you're in your studio of just making a work of art? Could I take that spontaneity into a more public, large-scale piece? So it exists on 3 parts, and this is what the piece looks like today with that moat. And again, it's called Groundswell. And it too, the broken car glass looks a little like water. I blended 2 different colored glasses to get that color. Or a piece that I did for the Academy, the National Academy in Rome, which was a temporary piece. I was asked, I was a fellow there for about 6 weeks, and I was doing a show, and they said, is it possible if you could do a site-specific work? And I loved it. They had no money. And I found out they were about to redo the gravel in their courtyard. And so I asked if I could borrow the gravel for the duration of my residency. And it turns out the size of an Italian wheelbarrow was the perfect size when you swung it out in an arc to make the shape of the wave. So it was called Il Cortili Mare, and we all had a party when the residency was up to rake the piece out. So it's sort of a temporal piece. A less temporal piece is a piece I completed a few years ago for the California Academy of Sciences. And this is an image, a sort of a topographic image of the San Francisco Bay. And in all my works, I think I'm very interested in revealing aspects of the natural world that you may not be thinking about. So this one is called Where the Land Meets the Sea. And I ended up having to combine the topographic terrain above land and below land, because even though technically they're the same and the water is transmutable, that's not how we see the world. So I had to get the topography above water from one group, and I had to get the topography underwater, and then I had to knit the two together. And it became what I would call one of my drawings in space. Permanently installed, you can go out and eat lunch under the San Francisco Bay. And again, we have a very funny habit. If we don't see it, we tend to pollute it. If we can't own it, we tend to pollute it. So a lot of what I focus on are kind of things that are literally right under our feet that you might not be thinking about, that you might not be seeing. And that's made out of a marine grade stainless because it's right on the headlands in the, at the California Academy of Sciences. Or this one was an art installation for the Indianapolis Museum of Art. Again, I was looking around for a prominent waterway. It's Indiana, there wasn't one, and then someone said, have you looked underground? So the second largest river, underground river in the US, is under the entire state of Indiana. So I went spelunking, took photographs, and had scientists go out and do sonar soundings under the water, created a set of drawings that created the terrain above and below the water, and created a wire landscape drawing that at one point in the middle, you get the cross-section. And that's permanently installed. Or this piece, for the Aria Hotel in, of all places, Las Vegas. They had asked a group of artists to install works, and I only wanted to focus on the Colorado River. So as you check in, there's Lake Mead, I think, or is that Lake Powell? You kind of have to connect where your water's coming from, and that's out of recycled silver. Or this piece for the U.S. consulate in China. Well, the U.S. consulate said, well, you know, it looks like a dragon, and it's the Yangtze River. So, but I can't look at it anymore without seeing a dragon. So sometimes I focus on waterways because they're incredibly important ecologically, and other times they're just beautiful drawings that I wanna express out of, in this case, pins. But I've as well done for the show that traveled systematic landscapes. With every iteration, the show traveled to about 7 places. I chose one river in each place, but in San Diego, there really wasn't a river of note. So instead, I followed a crack in the concrete floor and took dental picks out and silver leafed the Depot River, and it's still there to this day. And it led to, well, part of this big show, and the last part of the artworks, the third part is the works that are inside a museum, whether it's a studio sculpture. And I would say that all my work emanates from my studies and my studio's smaller scaled works, because when you're working at the scale of a bulldozer, you want to go into your studio and you want to make something yourself. So most of my work comes from and emanates from the smaller scaled works that I can actually make myself. So this is a little drawing of a person. This is like just a sketch. Well, what if I could bring a hill inside and you could walk up it and touch the ceiling? So this led to a show called Systematic Landscapes, which tried to bring kind of the large-scale immersive quality of my outdoor works indoors. This piece was 3,000 square feet, made out of sustainable 2x4s. From the front approach, it looks like a cresting water wave. From the back side, it looks like a landmass. This is sort of how it was fabricated. It started at the Seattle, the Henry Art Museum in Seattle. And there were 3 anchoring large-scale pieces: 2x4 landscape, which was in between water and land; Blue Lake Pass, which took a mountain pass in Colorado that I'm very familiar with, and sectioned it and pulled it apart to form a way. It's almost like I was very inspired by some of John McPhee's writings about geologic strata being pulled up and moved vertically. And so that's that piece. And then the third piece, so it gave you 3 very different relationships back to landscape: one you walked on, one you walked through, one you walked under. And for the wire landscape, I chose the southernmost island in the Atlantic called Bouvet. It was a ceiling island, but it was a singular point island, unlike Hawaii, which is like the Rocky Mountains, a ridge-formed island. And so it was called Waterline, and the only thing visible is the top 2 feet of this sculpture would be above waterline. Everything else is below the sea. And it just leads you to understand that the tallest mountain in the world isn't Everest, it's Hawaii. So maybe if, from an artist's point of view, I can get us to look at things that you might not be thinking of in a different light, we can kind of reset our perspective on something. Or this piece called Flow, again, FSC certified wood, kind of a moving water wave. Part of a show called Bodies of Water that was at Storm King as I was inaugurating the wave field. So this is just called Dew Point, just like scattered drops of water on the floor out of just cast glass. Or this, again, recycled silver of the Hudson River and the Long Island Sound. Because again, we think of the positive space, the landmass. We don't really think of waterways. We tend to negate them. So again, I did a reverse field to begin to express that, similar to what I've done with the Chesapeake Bay here. So you can see the large void at the bottom, it's Staten Island, and then Manhattan is a little bit further up. But as well, I've taken a look at aspects of the natural world that are at times temporal. So this was an image of the floodplain of Hurricane Sandy. And you can see the blue at the bottom of the picture is New Jersey. It was really hard hit, and then you've got the Long Island Sound. So this turned into a drawing in pins. And I apologize, you probably can't see that. It's about 12,000 pins of the floodplain of Hurricane Sandy. Or still yet, I'm looking at disappearing bodies of water. This is the disappearance of the Arctic ice cap over time from 1973 till 2000, I think in 10. And I cut it out of one piece of marble, with every successive layer being a reduction of that year's mean low ice cap. We're still yet, again, exceedingly interested in terrain. I don't know why, but this is latitude and longitude intersecting Manhattan, 44 degrees parallel. And it turned into a sculpture for my gallery, Pace, that really did a cross-section to another sculpture. 3 circles. The inner one is the terrain of the Arctic Circle. The middle one is the 44th parallel that intersects Manhattan, and the outer circle is the equator, which became a sculpture that was part of a show at the Parrish Museum in the Hamptons. And you can kind of see how complex the mountain ranges are under the ocean. Or this is a part of a group show that was at the Nevada Museum of Art that opened last year. This is the watershed of Lake Tahoe in pins. So these are drawings, like how does a sculptor draw? And I think I like to draw 3-dimensionally. And in the foreground is another glass drops, but for this one, I wanted to understand the clarity of the water around Lake Tahoe. So I started charting rainfall and what is called the Secchi point. They drop a disc down, and the light reflection, how far down before you can't see it anymore. And over time, to understand how much rainfall has changed and how much clarity of the water has been reduced and diminished. And that became a piece that spirals out from when they first started recording the water clarity in 1958 till 2014, and that's sort of the piece. Or this one. This is how Folding the Chesapeake started, which I think when I sent this to Nicholas, he was like, that's interesting. What is it? And so then I said, wait, I am obsessed with the Chesapeake Bay. Because along with the Columbia River estuary, these are our most famously abundant biological waterways. And I also love it because, formally speaking, I cast it first a long time ago. It looks like a ginger root to me. So I also choose waterways just because I think they're beautiful, beautiful shapes. Anyway, that's how that translated. And you all know what it looks like, so we'll skip that. But the idea was, and again, with the studio sculptures, you want to place these works within a contained, white box or not, and what I loved with working within the Renwick in its historic nature, I still wanted the work to almost ignore the architecture, that I don't want to genuflect to the architecture. It's like water. I just wanted it to flow wherever it could. And that's sort of the genesis of that piece. But now I'm going to switch gears. And equal to what I've been working on in the memorials and the art, I've been making architecture. And so, for instance, these are earlier works from my first show, Topologies. And this is a work that I did for American Express, their financial headquarters in Minnesota. It's called A Character of a Hill Under Glass. And it is about bringing a hill inside. But the bad thing that I did was, and this is it, it's a box, a winter garden box, but it wasn't what I was asked to install in. And that's sort of what it looks like. So it's called A Character of a Hill Under Glass. This is the architectural form that I was asked to put an artwork in. And if you'll notice, there were these massive 2-foot diameter round columns in the corners of the box, and they had asked me if I would install an artwork. And I politely went to the architects and I said, well, could we consider painting the columns maybe a charcoal gray or something? And they said, no. And I didn't quite know what to do, but I knew that there was no way. And the grid of the glass was square, so it was going to be extremely hard to relate to. So instead, and this is the bad part of me, I'm trained as an architect. The building was under construction 2 levels below here. So you'll know that the train had way left the station. And at that point, I called in my own engineers, and I called in my own curtain wall engineers, and I redesigned it. And I told the client that I could do this, it would fit into the schedule, we could restructure it, pull and free the corners up because you kind of had to, and then I installed the artwork. So I don't have any pictures of it as architecture, but I kind of redesigned it. So my other hat is that I make architecture. So I don't do much because, again, to defend and protect my artwork, I have a studio. I don't have an office. I tend to take on one project at a time in architecture. I'm as committed to the architecture, but I'm also fully aware that I have to balance between the art and the architecture. So this is a chapel for the Children's Defense Fund in Clinton, Tennessee, at the former estate of Alex Haley. Everything on the grounds is a 1-story log cabin that Alex Haley had moved on to the site. So how could I, as a modernist, create a work that would be contextual, but yet modern, new? And the motto of the Children's Defense Fund is, "Dear Lord, be good to me. My boat is so small and the sea is so large." So I thought of a boat as being a form that could be both modern and in keeping with the kind of the rustic nature of the site. And then twice a year they needed a much larger space. And so the interstitial canopied space has roller furlings that pull down and tent the middle structure, get them what they need while keeping the building pretty small for the rest of the year. And the whole thing opens up so that you can look inside, and it increases the capacity of the space by double. Along with it, I didn't realize I could dialogue between old and new, which is something I do a lot in the memorials. But there was a beautiful old barn on the property. I actually started with the commission for the library, so there were 2 buildings for the Children's Defense Fund. This is what started it, I think in 99, and they were about to tear this down, and instead I said, let's save it, and I slipped a modernist skin inside. And as you go up, oops, I'm missing a slide or two, the reading room's upstairs. Meanwhile, this is a private house in Colorado that I think is out of order. That's the interior of the library. Sorry about that. And this is a private house that kind of opens and shuts in Colorado, which in time, the back box will completely disappear in the aspen grove, only leaving the front box, which is about 4,000 square feet, and they dedicated this property to become a conservation easement. So if I go out into the woods, I won't touch it unless it's part of something that's what I would consider ecologically responsible. And this site was about to be developed. The client purchased it and then put most of the land into a conservation easement. And I'll hop on. This is sort of the inside. Or a private apartment that goes from being a 2-bedroom, 2-bath to a 3-bedroom, 3-bath. So I love the flexibility of space that never looks machined that way, but can allow us to adapt and use spaces in multiple ways. I'm going to end the architecture with one little project. This is a project that I'm working on right now in Tribeca, which is, again, an urban infill project, which I love participating in. This is a site right now. And that weird little garage just is not closing the corner, so we're in the process of designing that. Meanwhile, since 2009, I've been working on, and I just completed a project which you'll see 3 images of the inside, and that's all I'm allowed to show you. It was the last undeveloped, empty parking lot between MIT heading towards Central Square on Mass Ave. It's for Novartis, a medical research lab, and they had on the bottom a West Campus with a very urban interior court. So I master planned the courtyard on the East Campus and convinced them to create a public garden in the center, and then Building A I took the lead on, trying to maintain the 4-story scale of the adjacent buildings along the street and letting the research tower be set back and go up 8 stories. And that's sort of how it's looking. You can still see like construction posts out. It literally is opening as we speak. And the garden just was set in, so that should grow over time. And the privacy screen, which is the local stone quarried within 15 minutes of Boston, is called Chelmsford. And that is a south-facing wall. We did a lot of studies about light and the glass filtering that allows the light to go deep into the lab. And just to give you a hint, the inside of the lower portion, which I call the boomerang, has an inner courtyard heart. And the goal of the lower level is to support the research, but to get the scientists to come out of their silos and work with one another. So it's all about kind of creating a much more communal building that promotes dialogue. And then I'll just give you an idea of sort of the interior of the space and the cafeteria, the dining hall. And from the street, everything by the dictates of Cambridge had to be given back to retail, so that canopy becomes the entrance to the compound, and also above it is the auditorium. So, one last thing. The whole design was inspired by this image, and it's a macroscopic view of bone. And I figured what medicine does is it takes from nature and systematizes it, or tries to understand it. And so from the stone wall, which is much more trying to be reminiscent of an organic compound, then the fritting pattern within the tower allowed for reduced sunlight, but allowing daylight to filter through the entire labs, but also the pattern was almost a systematizing of nature that way. Leads to another project that I completed in China for a university, where the client had built this university in a southern part of China, Shantou University, because that's where he had come from. He had come with nothing. He had been quite successful, so he built out this university. And they wanted a gateway and a bell tower, and they wanted the gateway to be welcoming while still being, a secure entry. So the stone that you can see right through. And then the bell tower, which is about 90 feet high. Again, it's architecture, but the drawing is there, and it's calligraphy, and it's a simple brush stroke. And that's how it looks. And it did withstand a Category 4 typhoon when it was first up, which is kind of great. There was a part of my work that I didn't know what to do with in the book, or in my work. And I've worked on gardens, and I didn't know where they fit. And that's what took 2 years in topologies to figure out. They're part of design, and the same way my art has an indoor and outdoor component, my architecture does as well. So this is a little sketch of a garden in St. Louis, surrounded by a medical research facility at St. Louis University, where some of the toughest diseases are being treated. And the person who brought me in, his wife was terminally ill. And so I created a bowl of flowers that you could walk out on. So that person, that's real. That's not a rendering, that's a person. But the pattern of the lights in what I call the concrete lily pad is December 25th, 1959, the night sky over St. Louis. It's the birth year of the woman, and I gave that secret to the family, and I left it up to them if they wanted to reveal it or not, which they chose to go public with it. But as you walk out on this lily pad and you're floating out in a water lily pool, one poem by Emily Dickinson, "Hope is a Thing with Feathers." So I think people are coming here with incredibly tough medical conditions, a lot of them terminal, and I just wanted to create a refuge for them. And the bowl of lilies kind of has this disappearing edge that floats down to the bottom. Or here's another one. I couldn't believe this. So these are all fixer-uppers, I call them. This was for UC Irvine. Believe it or not, this was the School of the Arts Plaza. There was no there, and this is what it looks like today. And it became a garden of perception with an outdoor theater and a drawing room. And sometimes I use language, and for the School of the Arts, I didn't know what language to use, and I just came up with a simple drawing. And so out of this water table bubbles the water. Or a garden for Cleveland Public Library called Reading a Garden in Cleveland, Ohio. The title of the piece is spelled backwards, Reading a Garden, but then look at the reflection. And so the title begins to play off that the directionality and the weight of language. And I collaborated with my brother, who's a language poet, to create, it's actually a 3-part series. One is done for Athens, Ohio, called Input About Childhood Memories. Reading a Garden was almost a nonsense verse about reading. It's like a children's garden. And you can sit out and follow your way through this sort of whimsical poem. And then, of course, the chapters that break up the book are the memorials. I start, the prologue is the Vietnam Memorial, which starts it all, and then the Women's Table at Yale, the Civil Rights Memorial. And then I'm working on 2 last memorials simultaneously. The Confluence Project, which is a 6-part project along the Columbia River, which is basically a 15,000-acre ecological restoration, where I've been met at 6 different state parks, city parks, national forests with parking lots, restroom facilities, and manicured lawns that have no right being there. And then we've turned them into natural native grasses. And at Cape Disappointment, where Lewis and Clark meets the Pacific, they were about to double their parking lot, and we got them to do a transit study. Turns out they didn't need it, and we were able to reduce their parking needs. And so this is what you look at today, and you can actually see the Pacific. And again, it was timed with the 200th anniversary of Lewis and Clark, and I was brought in not by just the state of Washington through this Confluence Foundation, but the tribal elders of the Umatilla, the Nez Perce, the Chinook, had asked me to get involved. I was about to start on a project focused on the environment, and when these tribal elders came to me, I said, I'd love to work with you. Their request was, at the bicentennial of Lewis and Clark, excuse me, Lewis and Clark did not discover these lands, we were here. And they asked me if I would be involved. And so literally at the end goal of Lewis and Clark, their goal was to reach the Pacific. We inscribed a trail that leads you to the water, and on it, in their writing, you'll notice as you walk through their entire citation of their journeys, how many villages they went through. And it begins to teach you a story of Lewis and Clark, but intertwined with the deeper history of the Native Americans and an ecological history as well. So kind of parallel to this path is a quiet oyster shell path that the Chinook tribe, when they blessed the site, exactly 200 years to the day Lewis and Clark came here, they invoked nature. We call upon nature to teach us and show us the way, and we inscribe that poem onto this oyster shell path that literally follows the original shoreline before they put in the jetty, and the whole shoreline changed. And that's what that pathway looks like. But this is what I've been met with most of the times: parking lots. Hedgerows that are 8 feet tall and obscure the other most abundant estuary in the United States, the Columbia River. And so this is where we convinced them they could half the amount of parking, and that's what it looks like today. So it's a natural grasslands, and I kind of disappear as an artist in these places. I'm not attempting to make art per se. I'm attempting to get you back to nature and disappear and leave you out there connected back to the natural lands. But I couldn't resist. This is what we were met with, this incredibly weird, rusting fish cutting sink. And this is what it looks like today. But what I didn't know when I fell in love with this rusty sink, and the Confluence Foundation was really worried, why did I take 1 million pictures of this, was that the creation myth of the Chinook, whose homeland you're in, is of cutting the fish the wrong way. And from the blood of the fish springs an eagle. He flies to a mountain that you can see from this promontory and lays an egg. And when the egg hatches, it's the first people, the Chinook. So now as you cut your king salmon, you get to read the creation myth of the Chinook, and you realize you're in their homeland. So with every site, we tell you a little bit about the place, whether it's 7 story circles at Sacagawea that really talk about the seasonal trading routes of the Native American tribes, or Chief Timothy, which became, for the Nez Perce, an outdoor amphitheater that literally was just put in and we're waiting for the grass to grow. Or this is one that was chosen for ecological reasons. It's a bird blind. The National Forest Service was blowing the dam on the Sandy River. This bird blind will bear witness to the river as it resumes its natural course. And on it, we inscribed the 123 or 28 species that Lewis and Clark noted, but then we tell you what its ecological status, and over 43% of those species are species of concern, threatened, or extinct. And the final project will be Celilo Falls, which will be an arced walkway that will tell you about this place. More water flowed over Celilo Falls than flows over Niagara Falls. It was the sacred fishing grounds of the Native American tribes. And it was deliberately inundated in the last dam to go in on the Columbia River, the Dales Dam. So it'll start with a geologic history, just brief inscriptions, go to the mythic stories of the Native American tribes, then go to the decision of the Army Corps to create the Dales Dam, the pleas of the tribes and locals to not do this. It goes silent about 2/3 of the way, and at the very end it will tell you what it used to sound like as you're out now over flat water. And that's what it used to look like. So with that, I'm going to end with the last of my memorials, and that's Celilo Falls. And it's called What Is Missing. And it's something that I set out to do. I've probably been, since a kid, extremely concerned about the environment. My parents would kind of scratch their heads and say, I have no idea why. But for me, I think I was growing up in the 60s. Lake Erie caught on fire. The Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act all came into being, and I was very, very aware of how much man's impact on the environment was having. But also, we've all seen with the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act, if you protect it, nature's resilient. It comes back. So what is missing started as an idea? What if I could create a memorial that could jump form? What if it's like a guerrilla artwork and like water, it can flow wherever it's invited in? It's multi-sided, multi-formed. It can exist in temporary shows. It exists permanently. Its first installation is at the California Academy of Sciences on their eastern terrace. We've created through the BBC, National Geographic, and Cornell Anthology Labs over 75 1 to 2 minute educational films about missing species, places, habitats. Kids love to sit in here and learn about them. I've created So there's a traveling exhibit called The Empty Room that has traveled throughout the US and to China. I Need a Black Box Theater. You hide projectors in the floor. You give people these optic plates of plexi, and they can literally hold the species in their hands. Creative Time and the MTV Billboard loaned me their billboard for the month of April in 2010. And so we created 4 or 5 minute video segments that ran throughout the month. Because it's a volunteer project for me and I set up my own foundation, I tend to surface on Earth Day with new iterations of it. And I talk about it at the end of the book. I've been building this project experimentally and iteratively. If you go to the website, whatismissing.net, it's going to ask you to give us a memory. I'll go into that. But here's another way I've taken over. This is a guerrilla art project, but it's actually the Philip Lim fashion show. And this was in the fall. But what did we get him to do? It's called Seven Earth Mountain, 200 tons of toxin-free organic soil. And I did this, and he donated to What Is Missing, is all I asked. All the soil was repurposed to community gardens around the city of New York, and I got Philip to send out to his 300,000 followers a little information about soil. So what is missing? Soil. Since 1960, 1/3 of the world's arable land has been lost through erosion and other degradation. But What Is Missing is also trying to get you to think about what we can all do. So it's as much about action and about hope. So did you know with regenerative agriculture, which it will then tell you it's no-till organic, it practiced on the planet's 3.6 billion acres, could potentially sequester up to 40% of current CO2 emissions, according to Rodale Institute. Or did you know that the lawn is the largest irrigated crop grown in America? And here's another fun fact. More gasoline is spilled refueling lawn equipment than was spilled at the Exxon Valdez, and that's every year. So again, maybe as an artist, I can get you to think about things you're not thinking of, hopefully with a sense of humor at times, but then we link as well to not-for-profit, to NGOs, to environmental groups that are out there in the field doing the work. So with this one, I focused attention on the Perfect Earth Project, and we also included what you can do to take the toxins out of your lawn. And as you see that pale box surrounding the green box, that's 50% of your lawn. What if you gave 50% your perimeter to nature? What if you created a sustainable landscape? So again, the first thing is to make people aware of how dire the sixth extinction is. And it's not so much just the species, but it's the habitats that we need to protect. But as an artist, trying to get you to think about things that are missing that you might not be thinking of. Because again, how can we protect it if we don't realize it's disappearing? So from the scale of species, that a cod was larger than a man in 1895, and it's dwindled and it's completely threatened today because we simply overfished it. Yet, there's a phenomena that Jared Diamond terms landscape amnesia, and scientists refer to as shifting baselines. With every successive generation, we get used to what we see. We don't realize that in Manhattan, oysters were 12 inches in diameter and lobsters were bigger than me at the time the Dutch first came in. So part of what is missing on the website is called a map of memory. It's collecting these historic accounts of abundance, and it also asks you personally to share a memory, something you've personally witnessed diminish or disappear. That's a mountain of buffalo head skulls. So the website up now, whatismissing.net, has videos, timelines, historical and personal memories, great conservation stories, and our worst disasters. You can see these stories geolocated, or you can click a button, the clock button, and you can also look at these stories on a timeline. Timelines focus on cities, waterways, and species of note, and what you'll find, like there's one of the Chesapeake Bay, people settled mostly, except for Madrid, where there was water, massive abundance. First comes sewage, then comes industrial pollution, but then in the 50s, 60s, 70s becomes awareness, legislation, and things coming back, and that's sort of the arc. And the message is, if we protect it, nature will come back. And these are some of the quotes that are up on the website. Sturgeon were so plentiful in Hudson River, they were nicknamed Albany beef. And then I'm going to skip these because you can go online. This is just the Chesapeake Bay. The sturgeon were so abundant. And of course, with every story, the oysters were incredibly abundant in Chesapeake Bay. But by 1890, the oyster supply is dwindling. The sturgeon have disappeared. But then you begin to see, 88, Chesapeake becomes a eutrophic estuary. But then with the 2000 Accord, things begin to rebound. It's going to take time, but again, without protection, we cannot possibly restore these lands. These are some of the personal memories that have come in: ice forming on Narragansett Bay, or fireflies in South Korea. We're also linking to secondary schools, and WGBH and I are working to get high school kids to begin to research their town, interview their parents and grandparents, as well as we've linked to almost 40 environmental groups to share what they're doing. And what I'm working on for the next 2 years is called Greenprint. It's going to examine how we live, where we live, what we spend our money on. So just to give you an idea, I'm just, as an artist, if I can contribute in any way to help get people to rethink, reevaluate. So in Greenprint, it's going to tell us, there's a whole section on individual actions. That will morph into something called the Save the Planet Diet. Lose 10 tons, 10 pounds, add 10 years to your life, and save the planet too. What If, which is much more macro views of rethinking what the Earth could look like, and then something much more analytic, which we'll be getting into, called Mapping the Future. So this is from the What If section. What if 7 billion of us, actually we're now 7.2 billion, what if we lived at the density of Manhattan? How much space would 7 billion people take up? State of Colorado. So again, it's a mindset change. Is this really about population, or is this about resource consumption and land use? And could we envision rearranging those lights? Could we really talk? And it's not about moving us, we're already moving there. 50% of us live in our major cities. By 2050, 75% of us will. And I think 70% of all energy is spent in our cities, or 70% of our cities are producing global CO2 emissions. So this is what Missing is playing with a little bit. So and we're always quoting, and the quotes are right out, curbing climate change would cost annually $700 billion annually. Sounds like a lot of money, and I couldn't resist. Here are some of the things we spend our money on. So, well, we could save the planet, or it's what we spend on weight loss every year, and bottled water, or narcotics, and meetings in the US, or cigarettes. So the argument is, we're spending the money, and we're spending it. Here's the better one. You go into, can we rethink our priorities? The amount of money it would take to protect all of biological diversity compared to what we spend on the pet industry, or stabilizing all water tables versus bottled water sales in the US. And again, the estimates to restore is coming from Lester Brown, Plan 3.0. But again, it's just about kind of changing our mindset as to what we're doing. So what we're basically doing is we're having the biggest party in the world, and what are we leaving our kids and our grandkids? So we do have a whole section on what you can do. I know it's going long, so I'm going to hop through them. If you go to the website under what you can do, and by Earth Day, they'll be going out in cute little packets. But what I'm doing is I'm looking at how we're consuming the planet. And again, you have to kind of look at different areas. And again, we're having a happy little party, and everyone wants to be like us. So I think we have to really look at our consumption patterns. So of course, meat is an easy one, and the amount of acreage it takes. But I had no idea that a rabbit is so much more efficient than any of these other meat sources. You kind of have to do the math here. We couldn't resist doing this. And then, of course, you can always go lower down the food chain, which, yes, most of the world eats bugs. I don't quite care for it, but did you know that 30 million tons of the global annual fish catch is ground up into fish meal? And what do you think a free-range chicken or a freshwater trout would normally be eating? And yet we're feeding, I think one scientist said, we're feeding our chicken fish and our fish chicken, rather than maybe some things that they would naturally be eating. So I have a few favors to ask you. Don't eat Atlantic bluefin tuna. It's the lion of the sea, and it is going extinct. And after Japan and Spain, America is the top consumer of Atlantic bluefin tuna. Sorry, I'm lecturing, I'm being didactic. Or for that matter, shrimp is the most commonly consumed seafood. And one, it's full of antibiotics, and two, it is causing massive destruction to global mangroves. Or, love this one, coffee, 25 cents a cup difference, we can all do it. Second most traded good economically after petroleum. The difference in biodiversity between a traditional coffee plantation and a shade-grown one is, 3 times the species can grow in a shade-grown plantation. Or I love this one. Sugar is the largest crop in the world and has probably caused a greater loss of biodiversity on the planet than any other single crop. So I'm going to hop in. I mean, we could go on, and I don't want to. I'm going to leave you with one thing. Because my goal was to connect our habitat footprint with climate change. So let's imagine we ate 20% less meat and we gave that back to parks. How much would that be? That would be equivalent to all the protected land in North America and half of the protected land in South America. It's huge. Or, as Rodale is really focused on right now, changing our agricultural practices to be no-till. It reduces erosion, increases water, encourages plant growth, and really absorbs carbon. And the one I love the most, as sea levels rise, we need buffer zones, and the beauty is wetlands sequester 3 times as much carbon as a tropical forest. So as these are under threat, we could both protect ourselves and increase our carbon absorption. So I'm going to leave you with one little film. favor. That was the music for that was donated by Brian Eno, and it was co-produced by my studio and Radical Media. But go to the website, take a card, and share a memory, something you've personally witnessed diminish or disappear or recover. Or if you can remember something your parents or your grandparents told you. We're just trying to connect on a human level as well as on a kind of a scientific level with all that's going on. And that's it. Thank you, I think.